Hi. This continues the conversation about resources and what they look like in the time that I was born and started my journey through life. But I thought I'd use another example or an observation that maybe gives you a different perspective on what life was like back then. And I decided I'd use this view from the cotton patch, which represented a part of my life that involved my being out in the cotton patch on a regular basis and seeing that. And maybe you've seen these pictures of that are taken of a family out in the field, cotton field, as they're driving by um, the road and they snapped this picture. Well, my family was a part of that group, and I was a part of that group that was in the cotton patch. And I thought in doing this thing on resources that it would be important to uh, give you a little bit of perspective uh, from me and how I looked at the cars going by and the people that may have snapped that picture. Uh, One of the things that never crossed my mind is questioning the people in the car who were taking the picture. I was more interested in seeing this new thing, this new car going by, and imagining what it would be like up close. And recognizing that was not a part of my world at the time, I didn't have a problem with that and paid no attention to the folks who were in the car and driving. They just didn't interest me. Uh, but the responsibility I had at that time in terms of earning enough for us to survive, that was my focal point, and I accepted the challenge or didn't have a choice in terms of the challenge to do that. So that was my focus, but I never formed an opinion one way or the other about the folks that were driving by in the car. So I thought I'd share that with you from my perspective anyway. I don't know that that was the same perspective others had, but that happened to be how I looked at things. Uh, but in thinking about that period of time, because this was in the 40s, there were some things that had taken place already since the end of slavery that didn't quite fit with uh, or add up to the fact that we were still lacking in terms of resources that would provide us with a stable, secure environment. And I remember thinking that there has been a war fought over the right to have access to resources or the watering hole, and that war granted those that access. Also, laws were enacted during that same period confirming that we had access, and yet somehow that didn't change our status very much. So that was one of the confusing things in terms of what I was looking at. So the question came, when if those two things happen, why was that not enough? Enough for us to begin to establish a foothold in this country and begin to build our successes in life. Uh, to me, I came to the conclusion that number one, the real problem as to why we didn't have access to those resources was not addressed in the war that was fought or the laws that were enacted. that there was another problem that caused uh, us to pretty much be in the same position. And to me, that one thing that was missing was what I term here the status quo. The status quo was not on board with the results of the war or the uh, agreement with the laws that were passed granting that access. And so that status quo had uh, significant power to be able to overcome or get around those um, laws that were enacted and so forth. And they were active in doing that and continue to be even today. So uh, I thought in that area is where the real problem lies in terms of the opinions of those that were in power. I did run across something else that was a little confusing also, in conflict with my idea of lack of access to resources. And one was that following the war that was fought um, back in the 1800s, there was a period in which there was a significant amount of assets, resources that were allocated to the Black Americans. And in fact, here I say in the 1900s, there was documentation that we, as a race, owned about 15 million acres of land that were within our possession. And contrast that to uh, the other part or piece of information that in the year 2002, we only had 1 million acres of land in our ownership. Uh, so that was one of the things that was confusing to me. The other one was that we had almost zero annual income per household back in the 1800s or late 1800s following the Civil War. And today, or back in 2020, we had access to a total amount of uh, uh, household assets or income that was uh, greater than $5 trillion annually within the spending power of Black America. And in looking at that information, it caused me to, uh, the way I guess I think, ask questions about that. Why? What was the source of what was underneath those figures that uh, needed to make sense for me? Especially the change in land ownership, followed by a major increase in our annual assets that were available to us. And from my perspective, I kind of took a guess at how I would interpret those numbers. And to me, I came to the same conclusion on both sets of numbers. And that was a lack uh, of understanding of what to do with what we've been given. And I can understand that in the days of just after Civil War, because we had been um, denied access to proper education and that kind of thing. So that would explain the drop off in the uh, ownership of land in this country and being not really recognizing what we should be doing with. The other one was a little harder for me to take a look at, and that was and understand it. And that was over the years we have grown in terms of availability of assets, resources, or that watering hole. And we have been drinking from that water hole over these many, many years. So uh, to me, the assets were there, but it led back to the same thing I talked about with the land ownership. We don't know what to do with the assets that we got. And so what we end up doing, just as we did back in the 2000 and returning the land back to the original owners, we're also turning the assets, household asset income back to that same group, but just in a different format or form. And that form is in the terms of excess uh, jewelry and clothing and all of the trappings that are designed for us to feel we're important. The other one is in terms of multiple homes that represent a certain lifestyle that makes us feel important, or the ownership of multiple cars and other recreational vehicles that demonstrate from an ego standpoint who we are and invites others to look at us as something uh, different. So to me, I get the impression that from this, and this is just my opinion, that we still have not learned what to do with uh, the resources that now are within our control that could be reallocated to something that would improve our lot. And so um, this to me is a part of the path of man that we have been on, that that recycles uh, uh, the resources that we get back to its original form, and it stays right there, and doesn't really improve us as a group of people. And I'm sure you've heard of, because I know I have, that um, there are many examples of very successful people in my race that have made, uh, I'll say, millions of dollars that end up being broke at the end of their career because they didn't know what to do with that income. So to me, that points to specifically the fact that we need to begin to develop an understanding of the power that we already have, and, and learn how to use it to our benefit. And we keep looking at reparation being the answer to our problems, but reparation would never have given us the amount of money or income that we currently have uh, in our possession. So that was my take on those numbers that I ran across, and looking at this issue of trying to get out of that cotton patch that I talked about. So, anyway, the real question that came up as a result of this for me was this: that following the war that was fought, following the laws that were passed, and yet we were still pretty much in the same position. Were we really fighting the right uh, battle, I called it, in terms of what's going to make this turn around and be a lasting solution to this problem. And so I formed the opinion that the battle that would, for me, be more effective would be the battle for the hearts and minds of that status quo that I talked about, as opposed to the battle with government and laws that could be enacted, but could also be easily overturned, assuming who has power at a given time. So, to me, addressing the problem of the status quo not being on board would be a more uh, significant battle to engage in than the legal rights that we've already fought for, but have been overturned by the stroke of a pen. But anyway, back to comparing this to the two paths that I've been referring to, uh, I formulated one more question that has been in my mind for some time, and that is regarding these paths, is realignment with the purpose of God really the answer to resolving all of this? And I don't say that I got an answer, but for me, it was worth considering. So, in terms of the resources and what's available for us to be a part of that and welcome into that watering hole, this was kind of the frame of mind that I was in and looking at this going forward. The next video will be a little more difficult because it's going to be focused on the subject of religion, and it probably will strike a nerve because my interpretation of religion might uh, uh, conflict with what the traditional approach or look in terms of what that is. So it's going to take me a little thought as to how I want to start and present that discussion, but I always also want to be true to how I look at it, even though considering what kind of reaction I might get from it. So I'll see you in the next video, and thanks for watching.